Welcome to a very good panel discussion on DevOps. My name is Larry Carvalho. I'm a research manager on Platform as a Service with IDC. And we are going to kick off this panel. The first thing I want to do is start with you guys introducing yourself and saying, what are enterprises doing with cloud as you introduce yourself? So you want to go from there, John?
Yeah, so my name is John Willis. I'm a VP of Customer Enablement at a startup called Stateless Networks. We have a booth out there. I'm actually presenting. I got to run out of here at the end because I'm presenting 5 minutes down at DevOps Summit after this. So the question is cloud or DevOps or?
Can enterprises, that's a good point. Let me phrase the question right. Can enterprises really replicate what is being done with what born on the cloud companies are doing in a traditional enterprise?
Yeah, the answer is yes, right? It's a competitive edge. I mean, I like the DevOps angle. I don't even like to talk about cloud. I like to talk about DevOps, right? Because how you build infrastructure is a bigger DevOps story than it is just cloud. Cloud is a tool, in my opinion. No, nothing against this conference, but the point is, and I think the advantage is that one of the things that we know, and most of these guys on the panel I know, that good IT performance is a predictor of making money.
Right.
That's a fact, right? And so what we're starting to figure out now is there are certain cultural and behavior patterns that you can watch companies develop on. And I think DevOps and Gene Kim, who is the author of the Phoenix Project, basically just did a survey with Puppet Labs, and they've clearly they're showing some correlation between DevOps and IT performance, organizational cultural performance, which leads to IT performance, which leads to competitive advantage. So the answer is yes.
Okay.
I'm Randy Bias, the CEO and founder of Cloud Scaling. I won't go into my background. You should be able to find on Google. There's a lot. I guess if I want to answer that question, I'm actually going to relate a story. So in the fall of 2009, I was helping this small healthcare company called Kaiser Permanente on the East Coast, $35 billion healthcare company, figure out their cloud strategy. And I remember we had a couple weeks where their IT leadership team disappeared on us completely. And when they came back, I said, what happened? And they said, well, we had 3 outages on the website in a single month, kp.org. And kp.org, if you know anything about Kaiser, they do everything through a website. Everything is managed through a website. So it's really mission critical to the business. And they were managing it using that old silo mentality. So you had the storage team, and you had the network team, and you had the server team, and you had the developers, and everybody was kind of partitioned. What the web scale folks have taught us is that no longer is a go-forward model for any kind of 24/7 mission-critical kind of application. And the reality of the world is that those 24/7 mission-critical applications that face the internet are now foundational to businesses moving to the future. And so, I do think that enterprises can make that leap, but I also think it goes against the grain in a way that's pretty dramatic. And so the only way we're going to get there is through, very large amounts of effort and really grinding through the issues and the roadblocks and helping people understand that it's not about finger pointing, it's about shared responsibility for these systems and making sure they're up all the time.
Okay. So my name's Andy Mann. I work in the office of the CTO for CA Technology. So we're a very large, in fact, we're a large enterprise ourselves, Larry. We're actually going through the sort of internal transformations around Agile and DevOps and so forth. We're a software vendor, so we're writing software all the time for our business. And I know that we're trying to do DevOps, but even more so, I know that there are customers that I work with, people like DirecTV, Union Bank, there are a couple of public names, and there's content out there on the web of them giving their own description of how they're doing DevOps. And in actual fact, on Thursday at this conference, one of the largest banks from Australia, where I'm originally from, obviously, they're giving a session on how they're doing DevOps. So the large enterprises absolutely can do this. I do believe that it's one of the anti-patterns in DevOps that there is no such thing as a snowflake. There are no unique experiences. And I actually take a little bit of an issue with that, and I do think that the large enterprises are going to have to adopt and adapt the DevOps patterns in slightly different ways to deal with what I believe are constraints that are unique to larger enterprises that some of the web scale businesses and certainly smaller startups simply don't face. And and you can just look at things like SEC compliance, for example. Web scale startups do not have to deal with that level of reporting. Large enterprises do. So that brings in a whole new layer of governance. But if you don't do this change, if you don't go through this transformation, I think you're going to get gobbled up by the web scale business and the startups. Because absolutely, they're setting the pace for how we need to innovate. And I think enterprises can do it, but they're going to have to do it a little bit differently.
Okay, good. Vasu, introduce yourself.
My name is Vasu Sankaram. I work with an HP software CT organization. And again, all of you know what HP is going through. In terms of taking our customers through that DevOps journey, that cloud journey, while we are taking that journey ourselves. So we look at it as this convergence between the consumer side of the house and the enterprise side of the house in what we call the new style of IT, which is driven by cloud, by mobility, BYOD, and obviously security. And so, to specifically answer the question, yes, absolutely. Large enterprises are indeed taking this journey. As in HP, we have been taking this journey since 2009, and I think there are some benefits which are really coming out of it. Now, for me personally, I look at DevOps as a connected system. These are not siloed. It's almost like, think about it as the yin and yang, right? Dev is trying to go at full speed ahead, and Ops is trying to give you the stability, keeping the lights on. So it is a connected system. So for something like this to work, you need to take into account, as John pointed out, the culture. You need to take into account what is the current legacy in order to figure out how you can move forward.
Okay.
So I think your question was, what are enterprises doing in cloud computing? It's very clear. They're adopting it quite rapidly. They have been. It's been driven primarily by sort of many times digital engagement, systems of engagement, so forth and so on. And I think what's happened now is that's permeated into companies and IT organizations. That's the new normal. That's our vision of the future. We want everything to operate at the speed of cloud. And within most enterprises, that's going to end up, enterprise IT, that's going to end up being a forcing function around DevOps, because it's going to be like, it doesn't take us 6 weeks to get a server any longer. So because that friction's gone, how do I get the rest of the process sped up to map to that? And I think that's going to be, we're going to hear a lot about DevOps over the next couple, 3 years, because it's going to be, how do I get everything else running as fast as the infrastructure does?
Okay, very good. So when you see companies make this journey, what do you see, how do you see them moving along the DevOps maturity model? Where are they starting? Where are they finding themselves? How are they measuring themselves? And how are they moving forward? You want to start from here, Bernard?
Well, I find a lot of times what happens is again, it's a forcing function. And oftentimes the impetus for the forcing function is companies find out they've got a pretty important app running out in a cloud environment. And then somebody says, well, what are we doing about X, Y, and Z? Some kind of compliance, some kind of security requirement, something like that. Everybody goes, holy moly, we've got to figure out a way to map that in. So I'd like to say it's very strategic and thought out and deliberate. And what I'd say is what we've seen is it tends to be driven by a reactive process and then a sort of a how do we adapt? And there's a lot of angst around that.
Awesome.
I think part of the equation is also showing successes. Starting small,
okay.
Showing progress in a given area, get the grassroots movement going on in terms of getting the team buy-in. Now, this needs to be coupled with the overarching continuous assessment, wherein you do have this being aligned with the strategic intent of the company. Unless there is commonality of purpose, commonality of goals between Dev and Ops, you will continue to have that friction. So I believe making sure that common goals, common metrics associated with rewards, which are associated with customer outcomes, that would be a key part of the success also.
And when you think about DevOps as speeding delivery, right? And what you're saying there, Vasu, the idea of finding where the problem is and fixing it, right? And that's where I see a lot of our clients and a lot of our customers are working. They're finding the problem that's causing a constraint. What's slowing you down? And for different businesses, it's different. For some businesses, it will be in the dev cycle, and they have to move to agile. For other businesses, in test and QA, and then move to something like a service virtualization. For other businesses, it's the slowdown, the blockage point that ops cause, because they're trying to maintain that stability, and they think stability means no change. So it depends on where the problems are. For a lot of our customers, it's about removing those constraints in the dev test cycle, as much as it is about removing the constraints from the QA engineering ops cycle. But it just depends on where you are at different systems. Okay. And to Bernard's point, the idea of taking different approaches for systems of engagement, systems of record, systems of innovation, this idea of what they call a pace-layered approach, a different pace of change for different layers of your environment, whether it's the traditional mainframe-based system of record, whether it's the new innovative mobile-facing system of innovation. You can move at different paces at these different layers. And that's an approach I know that Gartner has recommended, and that, for our clients, definitely seems to be working.
Okay. Randy?
I want to be succinct, which is always a challenge for me. So the first thing is, the idealist in me wants to say that enterprises should operate like the web scale guys. The pragmatist realizes that, as Andy said, that may be very difficult. And the primary breakdown that I've seen is that there's a contract that exists kind of between the developers. It's a fairly dysfunctional contract in the centralized infrastructure teams, where basically the developers are highly incentivized to get things to market quickly, and the operators and IT infrastructure people are incentivized to manage down risk. So you see these guys, the developers, come over to the centralized IT teams and ask for gigantic wish lists of capabilities for a new application that's going to go on the data center floor, which of course these guys respond and say, hey, that's going to be 18 months and $10 million, and nobody's happy with that. So I see DevOps in the enterprise as being about renegotiating that contract. So we talk about breaking down the silo, but it's also really important to think of that as a contract and figure out how it can be a new contract. So you look at somebody like Fidelity, for example, and they've gone out and talked about this. They've actually rewritten that contract. They basically went to developers and they said, look, you can deploy anything you want to the cloud. You drive whatever you want, use as many resources as you want, but you must do it this way. It must be deployable with Puppet. The application must first be deployed onto the QA system, then the pre-production system, then the production system, and it must go through these gates as it goes. We must be able to test it. We must be able to mix in our Puppet security recipes so that we know that each of your virtual machines are to a certain security standard and so on. And so what they did is it allowed the centralized IT team to continue to manage down risk while allowing the developers to move at the pace that they want to. And that I see as sort of a guiding light for sort of enterprises in general, because if you look at sort of like a Google or an Amazon or Facebook, they already do those things. They're large enterprises that move faster and faster as they grow bigger, not slow down. And the only way to do that is to fix that contract, that dysfunctional contract.
So there's no shortcut. The enterprise wants to hear that you can be different, that you don't really have to act like web scale. You can kind of fake it. There's a great presentation out there by Facebook, and it's a presentation called How Did Facebook Get to 1 Billion Users? And there's nothing in that presentation about technology. It's all culture. And it's culture. And we learned this from Toyota Production Systems many years ago, right? And Randy, my good friend Randy, talked about the flow. He just talked about a flow that, things like Puppet and continuous delivery. Well, that's lean, folks. And the fact is that, the thing that gets me, I've been doing this 35 years, so I've been in enterprise IT, right? And I cringe when I hear somebody get up there and say, we need to be like Google, we need to be like Facebook, so we have to do more with less. And I think that's so screwed up, because Google and Facebook, they do more and more. Randy had a quote years ago where he said, top line ROI. Those people, if they're going to spend $10 million, they're going to spend $9 million on people and $1 million on technology. So it's about culture. It's how people start thinking about how they do their business. So when we talk about DevOps culture, again, go read the Puppet Labs survey. It talks about job satisfaction as being the #1 indicator for organizational culture, and organizational culture being the #1 indicator for IT performance, and IT performance is a competitive advantage. Broken record.
Okay, so I'm going to follow on with a question which is an issue which faces IT. They spend a lot in maintenance and less in development, more on just keeping the lights on. So continuous integration, continuous deployment, delivery, how do you see that fitting in with DevOps, that in the future as you go, as you create a solution, is that going to reduce your whole effort on an ongoing basis to maintain these applications? Because IT is just not getting more applications requested, but also upgrades and changes, constant changes. So you understand?
Well, there's certain fundamentals in that flow. One of the fundamentals is source control. Right? Start thinking about every artifact that you manage in your infrastructure. So people say, can the enterprise do 100 deploys a day? Amazon boasted they did 1,000 production deploys in 1 hour a year and a half ago, right? But you don't have to do that. So when we say continuous delivery and you get scared and say, oh my God, these companies have these posters for 100 deploys, 500 deploys a day, you don't have to do all that. But you should be thinking about every artifact that hits your factory should be in source control. If it's the network config, if it's an Apache config, you talk about Puppet and Chef, right? Like everything that you do should be version controlled. And what should happen after version control? There should be a peering. I think GitHub is probably the greatest experiment, greatest contribution to this, at least this decade, and it might be the whole century, because it forces us to work in a collaborative workflow model that is now the norm. So everything in source control, now I use some type of collaboration method for peer review, and then I flow this. And you don't have to do everything day one. But I'm talking to a lot of enterprises now that are using GitHub for lots of stuff. And they're doing peer reviews, and they're doing commits, and they're doing, and they're storing things in source control, even operational procedures in GitHub. So I think, again, you can follow that flow that ultimately gets you down to, production deploys and hit a button and it's in production, but you don't have to start there.
So you're seeing that as an
oh, absolutely, yeah,
on using that. Okay.
I mean, one of the challenges is that when you hear that number, 70 to 80% of IT spend is about keeping the lights on. We created that mess. Right? If you look at Google and Amazon, these are highly automated systems. Why is Google able to be highly automated when the average enterprise isn't? Well, it actually isn't secret, and it isn't about software tooling, and to some degree, it isn't even about people, although a large part of what John said is accurate. What it's about is heterogeneity. If you look at Google systems, they have roughly 10 hardware configurations across 2 million servers. When I went into Korea Telecom, there were 526 hardware configurations across 13,000 servers from 26 different vendors. Right? That is unmanageable complexity. It makes things like automation difficult or impossible. In order to dig out of that hole, we have to move to systems that have less value-added enterprise features in the x86 chassis. We need to move to more generic routers and switches, less complexity in the system. And if you extract a lot of the complexity and you move to a more homogeneous, not completely homogeneous, but more homogeneous system, and you get rid of some of the older pieces, you can drive that 70 or 80% of cost of keeping the lights on down to something that makes a lot more sense, which means that the remaining dollars can be spent on innovation and making the business move faster.
So Randy, for that kind of a situation, you talked about so many configurations, so many combinations. Their journey is very different from somebody else who's just starting out, obviously, that you have. But is that journey different for different types of enterprises? Somebody who are mainly more on mainframes or Unix or
right.
Those kinds of combinations?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, it's basically about how long that the business has been in business. So if you're a newer business like Google or Amazon, you didn't have the weight of that history to drag along with you. But the reality is that we operate in the space that we operate in. So all we can do is try to solve the problems given where we're at. And so the vast majority of enterprises we've seen, I mean, I mentioned Kaiser earlier, they're running a mainframe for their electronic healthcare records, and they're never going to change that. Why? Because even though it costs them $100 million a year, it is their key mission critical differentiating capability. It runs on the mainframe. They don't want to touch it. However, that being said, without giving more information away about them, there's lots and lots of places where they could optimize today, which they choose not to, because there is fear about people losing jobs and so on. I mean, it's the culture thing. The culture challenge gets in the way. There's a lot of I'm sorry, I'm going to steal just a little bit more stage time. My first job was in 1990. I was 19 years old in Silicon Valley. And I started at this job, and I was the junior sysadmin on the team. And I had never had a job before. I just taught myself Unix with SCO Unix at home because my mom worked at SCO. And so I show up to this job, and I had been learning how to code and do system administration at the same time. I didn't see DevOps, like I didn't even have those partitions. And these guys would do everything they could to punch in at 9 o'clock and leave at 5 o'clock that day. And they did little nothing. I just started automating everything that they did, and they were pissed. They were pissed. And I was the senior guy a year and a half later, but the problem was I had made them somewhat irrelevant because they couldn't code, they couldn't script, they didn't understand how NIS and NFS and all those systems work. They just wanted to do the absolute minimum for their job. And I'm not dissing the average IT guy. I mean, I've been in IT a lot. People work hard, but there are a lot of people out there who are just punching the clock, and they don't want to like go to the next level. And there's got to be some house clearing. Sorry to say it.
Andy?
Yeah, I'm going to sort of bring it back a level because in my mind, DevOps doesn't start with dev and it doesn't end with ops. It starts with planning. It starts with portfolio planning, especially for large enterprises. So a large enterprise, you talk about freeing up the ability to innovate, right? You've got to understand what am I doing in my business that is mission critical. So maybe the mainframe that Kaiser is mission critical. It's a differentiator. It has throughput issues you can't solve other ways. There's reasons to do that. But you think about all the other systems you're using, maybe running SharePoint servers or running email. Is this really making your business fundamentally better? Why are you doing it? Give it up. We hear about rogue IT and shadow IT, and that's because IT is not giving stuff up quickly enough to respond with innovation. So start by understanding what you're doing throughout the portfolio. And for these large enterprises, it's 1,500, 2,000, 5,000 applications or more. It's not a simple process. But you have to understand that some of these things that you're doing today, honestly, you should not be doing because they're taking 50, 60, 90% of your budget, your people, your time, your resource, just to keep it running. Stop doing that. The ability to say, no, I'm going to get someone else to do some of this stuff, helps you free up your assets, helps you free up floor space, people, servers, time, money, to be able to start doing new things in new ways. And so when you talk about that problem of the ongoing lights on spend, it's such a huge problem. You've got to get out of that business, at least in part. And the only way to do that is knowing your portfolio.
Okay.
Well said.
Awesome.
So specifically, I think there needs to be a clear understanding of what is DevOps, what is the purpose, what do we mean by continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment. I mean, there are so many continuous terms which are coming every day. So there needs to be a clarity and looking at it from the perspective of what technology functions need to be there in order to support the business outcomes. And so looking at IT as a value chain, looking at it all the way from planning through development testing, through the assurance and the fulfillment, and making it into iterative cycles, enterprises will figure out where they need to spend their initial investment in, and over time, look at baselining and streamlining both the process as well as their investment in their product portfolio.
Okay.
So I think your question was, so you've got this huge amount of spend tied up in legacy. What do you do about that in a world of DevOps? Because I start off by saying there's going to be a forcing function to move to DevOps because of this new expectation. I think I'd like to just elaborate on what Andy said, because I think he was really right. There's going to be a huge pressure into IT organizations about how do I change that spend pattern, because I'm not getting a lot of value out of that legacy stuff. I have it. I'm spending a lot of money there. So over the next, I would say 5 years probably, one of the key strategic goals for most IT organizations is how do I pull spend out of that space and free it up for these other areas that I'm going to have a lot of pressure on because of these new kinds of systems I'm going to be building. And to be honest, I don't expect that those are going to be backported into being DevOps. I think most IT organizations are going to say, is this a sheep or a goat? Is this a keeper, or is this something I get rid of? And they're going to try and figure out, I think most IT organizations will try and figure out probably 60 or 70% of that legacy spend is something I can outsource to somebody else. Somebody who runs a better sales automation system than I can. Somebody who runs a better email system than I can. And they're going to reduce all that spend and free it up for that area. I don't expect to see DevOps move into those things. I think those are going to be left alone as little pools of stuff. And all the new systems, for which there'll be huge demand, are going to move to this new model. The challenge for most IT organizations is that they'll go, I used to do it this way with all this stuff. I've got all these new applications. I'm just going to keep doing it the way I used to with these new systems. That's going to be a huge problem because the business will say, I won't accept that. And if IT organizations try and continue with that, those business units will just say, I'm going to go find somebody else.
So the next question is going on. Earlier we heard both from Microsoft and IBM, they say when we put something in the cloud, we can quickly measure it and we can go back and say, where are we having problems, where are we not, what can be improved further? What are the tools coming up to work on DevOps that will enable these kinds of things, that is a continuous measurement system that you can, are there any tools really moving up to the top that enterprises can leverage to go use this capability to really make a difference in their organization?
I think Randy actually mentioned automation. Was it John or Randy? Talked about the automation is absolutely key to this. DevOps is very much a cultural change. There's no doubt about that. But as John actually mentioned, was flow. The idea of increasing the speed of flow between parts of the organisation, making clean and predictable handoffs. So we're going to see a rise in a lot of automation tools. Configuration management, configuration automation is obviously a very key part of the early days of DevOps. I think that expands some operations automation tools. Getting that feedback loop closed. So from operational monitoring, closing that feedback loop, understanding performance, understanding capacity, understanding the infrastructure. Facebook is a big user of the data center infrastructure management tools that we have, for example. To feed back that information back to development, how can you continuously improve? You were talking about continuous everything, continuous all the things, right? Yeah. And so the automation tools from the agile planning, the workload management, the processes to automate deployment, release automation, config, capacity, every little bit helps. But again, it's about finding where the constraint is that you need to automate. But just to start with, I would say a bunch of automation tools.
Okay. The DevOps tools, it's quite simple, and I'm going to be bold here and say this. It's Git. Like, if it's anything else than Git, you're doing it wrong. I believe that's what Adam Jacobs says, the founder of Ops Code. It's Jenkins, maybe some variation of Jenkins for continuous integration. This is the model that is driving almost everything on your iPhone today. Like your iPad, your iPhone, basically every one of these companies is running Git, so a variation of GitHub. They're running some form of Jenkins, and there is some type of server configuration with Puppet and Chef, and hopefully they're looking at stateless for network configuration. But I mean, that tool is now the standard for DevOps. And I don't like to talk about tools, but there's no argument that you pick 10 things on your iPhone right now, an application, and I would argue that 8 of them are basically using GitHub, Jenkins, either Chef or Puppet.
I mean, the important thing is to address the mindset. I mean, there's many aspects of culture. One is the mindset of how you're going to go about this. And I'm not going to recommend any tools because I actually don't think it's very helpful. But what I do think is important to understand is that, and if anybody's heard of the pets versus cattle, cloud meme, what I've been trying to get people to understand lately is like, the responsibility, in the past what we would do is we'd build like a 2 or 3.9 app and we put on a 5.9 infrastructure and pretend that was good enough. And the reality is what we want is a 3 or 4 or 5.9 application. Except if you use DevOps techniques and automation and auto scaling and you shared nothing architectures and all that goodness to build an application like that, those kinds of applications are designed to route around failures. They assume that the hardware is unreliable. I mean, that's the story. And so in that kind of a situation, you need a 2 or a 2.5.9 infrastructure. And what I still see people doing is dragging the old baggage over to the new way of doing things. Oh, we're going to use DevOps. Let me give you the most extreme example. This is not quite DevOps, but a customer I was talking to, they're running Hadoop on UCS B-series blades attached to a fiber channel SAN. I mean, that's not getting it, okay? You just can't do that. You have to really be thinking about what it takes to go the whole hog, to really, double down on that completely new model where your applications are going to be smart enough to route around failures. And then the question of tooling becomes, what kind of failures am I having? How do I detect them in advance? How do I know an anomaly is occurring? How do I respond in real time? How do I know whether it's something I can deal with automatically or I need to notify an operator and actually have somebody take a look at it?
Do you disagree that almost a high percentage of all web scale is not Git, Jenkins?
No, like I said, I didn't mention tools, but that's just a base. I think that that gets you to a certain place, but then if you want to go to the next level, like how do you detect server failure, and how do you in a cloud system it can be challenging, right? I got 2 VMs and they have 20% packet loss. Where's it happening? So on one of the hypervisors, network in between, that's very, very challenging. And, the answer might be, shoot both those VMs in the head and start up 2 new ones. But, just as somebody who's seen a lot of production systems, it can get more chaotic than that. You might have, not just 2 having a problem, but, I can give you some examples, but I don't want to steal all the stage time. But, you could have like one having 20% packet loss to 20% of your VMs. Why does that pattern exist? Why is that there? You need tools for that.
Vasu?
To me, the way I look at it is, obviously with DevOps, there's the people, there's the process, and the technology aspect. Technology, I think, we've already talked about automation. We have a bunch of things there, whether it's continuous integration, continuous testing, build verification testing, automation delivery, and the monitoring associated. So I think here, those kind of tools are well known. There are myriad different tools. I think to me, the couple of tools which kind of aren't as prevalent so far are around the communication collaboration, especially with the culture. What do we need to do in order to have the right set of collaborative tools? Yes, we have Wiki, we have version control as kind of a poor substitute, in my opinion, but there needs to be more, which is fostering that virtual water cooler, right, when people are coming together, right, both across dev and ops. And from a process perspective, obviously, we do have process automation. I think application release automation is something which is coming to the forefront. So tools which support that, I think, need to be there. Now, ultimately, yes, open source has, there are a lot of open source tools which are there. In my opinion, it needs to be tools which are frictionless, which can have the integration across the value delivery chain, right? When you can have handoffs from all the way from your planning to development, all the way through operations, and everything in between, you need to have it more frictionless. So something which is more open, I think those are the tools which will win out in the long run.
Okay.
I realized I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Bernard. I'm Bernard Golden. I'm Vice President of Strategy for Active State Software. And your question, I think, was, what kind of underpinning tool chain or products will you be able to use this? And John pointed out, many of the web scale companies have addressed this. They've really built up an entire infrastructure to enable this. I would say, at least my expectation is that most enterprises probably won't do that, kind of build it yourself from open source tools, because I think that's probably more work than they want to do or more challenging. I think they're going to look to established traditional vendors or established vendors, let's put it that way, to put together a sort of a pre-integrated set of tools for them to use. We have a couple of representatives here on the panel, so I'm sure they agree with me on that. But what I would say is, if you're an enterprise IT organization evaluating this, and as I started off by saying, this is going to be a forcing function. This is going to be on your plate. There's no sort of, maybe we'll get around to it. It will be something you'll have to address. The one thing I would say is that this new world we're going to of cloud applications, frictionless infrastructure, the tradition in IT is that every new platform brings forward at least a 10x explosion in applications. And what that means is your DevOps solution, whatever it is going to have to be able to scale to 10 times as many applications as you're managing today, 10 times as many servers and resources and so forth. So what I would encourage you to do is, when you start evaluating those commercial tools that you're going to be looking at, to understand whether they'll be affordable at 10x the scale that you're dealing with today. And make sure that you have that as part of your planning, because a solution that says, oh, I can afford the monthly payments now, won't be quite the same if you've got 10 times many applications, perhaps. So I would definitely encourage you to look at that that aspect of it.
John, when you were talking about when you were talking about like having this very stripped down set of tools, part of what I heard and I thought you were trying to say is like, beware the dangers of like getting too involved with fiddling with the tools and the bright, shiny objects and not spending more time on the people and the culture and process, which is the harder part of the equation. Is that?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's, I kind of kick myself for diving into the tool thing. I mean, I've always been, culture, DevOps is a strategic weapon, 5 or 6, so I was the 9th guy in at Ops Code, right? And so 8 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, I was trying to pitch Puppet to enterprise people, and people would throw me out of the room, tell me that, like, you're insane, there's no reason to do this, you build a server once and it never changes. I mean, literally, and that's what I actually hear about network devices. I'm hearing the same thing now. You build a network, why would you care about building abstractions for networks? But the thing was, I used to tell people there was this 3% club that you could be part of. Right? And like, if you can get in that club, like, you're beating 97% of the world. Well, guess what, folks? That club now, according to 451 Group and the new DevOps survey, is more like 18 or 19%. Right? So it is about culture. I just wanted to point out that I think that as you look at the web scale companies, the blueprint for how they're doing it, it's mind-boggling. I know you do. I visit hundreds of web scale companies when I was at OpsCode and in Stratius, and it's just ridiculous how similar, back to the one single structure. So yeah, it is about culture, and it's not about tools, and it's about, but I think you learn from the tools. I mean, we learned from WebScale. Okay. Right? WebScale taught us all to do things now the way they were doing it 10 years, the way you were doing it.
15 years.
Yeah, Randy was building web scale infrastructure before it was even cool. And now everybody else is, the guys like Randy have left those big companies and helped, commoditize a lot of those skill sets. And that's all kind of in a cultural and tool infusion.
So everybody's talking about culture and how people are moving along with overcoming that culture barrier. Do you see universities really starting teaching new students come up and say, hey, are they still teaching the old way, or are they really educating people and saying, this is how you get things done? So if it's not from the traditional IT person who has done the same thing 25 years, the new person they're hiring is the one going to be able to come and make the change. So
I'm going to say something really quick, because I'm like Randy, I don't want to steal it. It drives me nuts that a computer science student out of a large, like a Georgia Tech or something, has never heard of Deming or Elliot Goldratt, and that just drives me insane. Okay. That you could get through a 4-year university computer science degree and never know who those two guys are.
Vasu, you want to talk about?
I'll give a slightly different perspective. Being a recent management student 4 years ago, I think there are constructs there which are being taught in terms of business agility, focusing on agile delivery. I think those are there. I don't have as much insight into whether on the computer science side, on the technology side, as much is being taught.
Okay.
I think the traditional complaint from industry is that computer science programs lag what their developments are in the industry. So I think it's not that likely that new students are coming out sort of going, oh yeah, I've got that whole DevOps thing nailed and I learned all about all these different things. But I would say that they sort of come out with an expectation, I use open source tools. I just stuff the download. There's immediate availability. There's an assumption that IT is resources are easy to get and you can really focus on the application, which again is sort of the forcing function for all that other stuff. So I don't think they're necessarily going to come out saying, I can come in and help you do all this, but they're going to be great customers of you when you put that stuff together.
Andy?
Yeah, look, I think universities are teaching, they're not teaching enough. Right? I mean, in the office of the CTO, obviously, we're trying to hire the best and brightest. Please look up ca.com/careers, right? Because we're trying to hire some great people, because we want to be a great company. And it's tough, because we aren't necessarily looking for people who have knowledge. We're looking for people who have ability. And I think as universities progress, I agree exactly with John, teaching principles of flow, teaching principles of breaking down silos, I think is really important. I'm not seeing that from universities at the moment. They're teaching skills and knowledge, but not as much teaching ability and attitude. And when you're talking about a fundamental cultural shift, and I'll give you an example, right? Younger developers coming out and doing mobile apps. and you end up with things like Path, which sends huge amounts of data, address books, and so forth back to a common server. Big brouhaha over that a couple of years ago. Just recently, Snapchat, right? So I've got a mobile client, and I've got a server-based API, and of course, my mobile client's the only thing that's going to hit that API, right? Yeah, wrong. How about if I send a call and I get 10,000 usernames and avatars and passwords and email addresses back? Huge violations because universities are not teaching governance, the attitude. And when you're talking about hiring for an enterprise, that stuff's important. We can't have developers who don't understand security and governance and compliance and how you build that in. And so, I mean, this is one of the other fundamental differences between startups doing mobile apps, for example, and an enterprise doing like a banking app. Fundamental differences in how you approach these. That stuff is not being taught at university, but if you've got an aptitude and an ability, we'll teach you that.
Okay.
I mean, I have a pretty cynical view on the way that the educational system in the United States works, and I won't bore you with that today. But in the early 90s, when I was helping build out the commercial internet, early ISPs and data center businesses, you could not go to school to learn anything about BGP or OSPF. None of that stuff existed. And, we were just flying by the seat of our pants. And the reason is that, like, managing production systems doesn't look like anything that you have to do in the academic world. It's completely and utterly unrelated. There was a carrier that we helped build their OpenStack deployment on. They had a PhD in networking. This guy had spent like 8+ years learning everything about, like he could just drill me on like network protocols. And I was like, okay, that's something I can still look up on Google if I need to, but okay, you're smarter than me. And on the day that we released their production cloud, the hour that they were going to do a public launch, he decided to log into a switch and do a manual change to the switch, which brought the network down. Yeah. I can't teach people in school not to do that. I mean, the problems that you face in the real world with real production systems can only be learned by being hands-on. And if there was any advice I'd give to the university systems, it's that we need to make sure that those students are out, getting hands-on and getting real, application experience. Applied computer science is always going to be more valuable than book learning.
I know that guy.
Okay, so one question. I focus on platform as a service. We talk about DevOps. Do you see these two movements? Platform as a service is well known to a lot of folks, within cloud computing, infrastructure, platform software, all that stuff. And DevOps, are people with platform as a service products, solutions, bringing more DevOps capabilities in there? Do you see that moving together, coming as common platforms? What are your thoughts? Who wants to go first?
Well, did I mention that ActiveState is a platform service company? So, for sure. The whole, I guess I apologize for being like a broken record. The whole thing is businesses go, I've got to move faster. Yeah. I'm now sort of IT-infused business products or services. How do I do that? So part of it is how do I develop applications faster, and part of it is how do I roll this stuff out more quickly. How I roll it out more quickly is DevOps. How I develop stuff more, applications more quickly is platform as a service. It provides a whole set of frameworks. And I would encourage you to come to the next session that I'm presenting because it's all about how do I do apps faster.
So I think Bernard just nailed it. I think to me, IT is facing the threat of the shadow IT. So rather than taking that threat head on, become a broker of services. Especially as we are moving away from a goods-dominated logic to a service-dominated logic, it just makes sense to move up the value delivery chain, right? Infrastructure, and then on top of that, platform and even other software services, for sure.
Okay.
I'm not convinced by platform as a service yet. And all deference to my good friend Bernard over here, I'm prepared to be convinced. But right now, from an enterprise perspective, and this is very critical, not for startups and web-scale businesses, because I think there's a whole different conversation there, as you said, about standardization and getting rid of these hundreds of different platforms. And I do think large enterprises need to do that as well. But I see platform as a service as more of a reaction against the inertia of a ops department who can't satisfy the needs of developers. And so developers are creating these platform as a service operations that they can satisfy their own needs. And that's great, and they need to do that. But for larger enterprises, the idea of a standard platform is really, really hard, especially when you start to talk about bigger iron, Unix systems, you start to talk about network environments, you start to talk about global distribution. Platform as a service as a way of standardizing the environment, I do like the idea. I'm just not sure that I've ever met a developer in an enterprise who believes their standard platform is everyone's standard platform. Yeah. And so I'm skeptical about platform as a service, but as I say, I think it's a smart direction. I'm prepared to be convinced. Yeah. I guess time will tell.
I agree with what you're saying, but
I hope you'll stop by the ActiveState booth.
I intend to come by the ActiveState.
No, but I think going back to what Randy was talking earlier, one company who has some mainframe apps, they're never going to touch it, and I don't think platform is going to touch some of those kinds of things which people like to leave alone. But I'm just talking for most of the new applications, or the ones that can fall into a common. So Randy, you want?
Yeah, I mean, DevOps we've agreed is culture, process, people, and some tooling. I think it's applied across all of these things. And we're looking at a spectrum from roll your own 100% like Netflix did on their tool chain to, I want an app marketplace where I can do Drupal on demand. And then as you move down the spectrum, you got configuration management tools and process and GitHub and those kinds of things. And you get a little bit less capabilities than if you wrote that all yourself. And then the next step up from that is cloud application management systems like RightScale and ScaleR and Dell Cloud Manager that kind of package up the DevOps-y techniques a little bit more. And then next step up is platform as a service, which constrains you even further, gives you less customization, but is embedding a lot of those DevOps ideas and concepts behind it. So I don't see those as being separate, but really kind of mutually supporting.
And with 18 seconds left,
ignore
containers.
When
they said plastics 40 years ago, it's containers. It's Docker. Yeah, let's take a look at Docker.
No, ignore this timer. We started actually a little early, so we got 2
Yeah, but I got to go over there.
Yeah.
I got to work on Anyway.
I'll give the audience one chance. We do have 2 minutes. Any questions that you'd like to ask from the panel that I've not covered? Quick chance. One. Yes, go ahead. Quick.
As a university student, I completely agree with everything you said about how they don't prepare you for applied computer science. What would you recommend to university students and recent graduates to be able to prepare for applied computer science?
Okay, let me repeat a question. She's a university student. She agrees with everything they talked about what is being in the university, but what would the panel recommend to them?
Look, the best thing I did was an internship with IBM. And I'm not saying you should go to IBM and do an internship. I would suggest you go somewhere in the valley that's a little bit hipper and cooler. But really, go to a working business that is running IT. To your point, Randy, you don't learn at university what the real world of running an IT shop is about. And I think that level of experience, whether it's a day or a week or maybe even longer, that would certainly be what I would do.
But do it at a startup because you're going to be over your head.
In the meantime, make sure you minor in anything that has the topic Deming in it or Elliot Goldratt.
Vasu, anything that you would recommend? No?
No.
Plus 4.
Okay, thank you to all of you attended and our panel.